Hey folks, okay, so welcome to my nerdy office. Uh, we are going to get into Nixon and the crisis in confidence today. Probably a little bit of an overstatement as far as this crisis in confidence, but it kind of does ring true to a degree. Anyway, so this is the 1968 election. Richard Nixon is going to initially run against Robert Kennedy Sr., not Jr. Robert Kennedy Jr., the guy running around today, is this guy's son. Kind of dramatic departure on their politics. But in the 1968 election, something really neat's happening. We've talked about this before, and really it's been going on probably in class for maybe about a month and a half, that the Republican Party's hanging out. They are hanging out right where they've been. You know, they're sort of what we would think of, 10, 15 years ago as political moderates. They're not really too far one side or the other, especially on social issues. Well, they're hanging out here. The Democratic Party early in the semester, pre-Civil War and during Reconstruction and the early part of the 1900s, they have been social conservatives. So they're over here on the right. Well, during the semester, we saw this in the 1940s, especially with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They're moving to the left. And probably at this, definitely at this point in the class and in history in the 1960s, they have gone from socially conservative to they are on the other side of the Republican Party and in the social liberal territory. This is, you don't have to get this down, but this is 1968. Well, 4 years ago, under Lyndon Johnson, the Democrats have passed the Civil Rights Act of 64. The next year, they've passed the Voting Rights Act of 65. John F. Kennedy was an outspoken supporter of Martin Luther King Jr. Later in his term. And Lyndon Johnson is definitely, in the same camp of, racial equality and kind of stuff like that. So the Democrats have moved to the left pretty far, farther away. They were on the right, and now they've passed the Republican Party, and they're kind of on the social left now. Probably more in here. They'll move over this way a little bit more later. But this election is neat because in 1968, a lot of people, I don't even want to say the majority, but a lot of people that were Democrats have moved with the party, but there's also a lot of people that haven't. There's a lot of people that were social conservatives and they're still social conservatives and they still kind of vote Democrat, but the Democrats are doing something different and we're not sure really where they're going. And so they're kind of in a limbo a little bit. Their party is differing from what they feel. And we really see that with this election. The Democrat National Committee is going to, in 1968, run Robert Kennedy. Well, Kennedy's going to get assassinated partway through this election. But there's a lot of former Democrats, especially here in the South, that very, very much, they still feel like that they're Democrats, but the Democratic Party has left them. And so we get one of those former Democrats, George Wallace. George Wallace, former governor of Alabama, his stand at the state schoolhouse door, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. George Wallace was a Democrat, but the party is not his party anymore. And so George Wallace is going to run for president in 1968 as a third-party candidate. And the party is not so important, but they're going to run under the banner the American Independent Party. But here's the thing. Oh, also, we didn't talk about him, but he's a interesting guy. But George Wallace's vice presidential candidate is going to be Curtis LeMay. Curtis LeMay was the head of the Strategic Bomber Command, and he's about blowing stuff up. So super aggressive military kind of dude. But George Wallace is going to campaign on things like, hey, Nixon with his affirmative action and forcing companies to hire women and minorities, we going to get rid of that. Also desegregation stuff. George Wallace, he will say, and I don't believe him, but he will say later in his life that he was wrong about all that stuff, and he does publicly turn a corner and say that his racism stuff was wrong. And who knows, I could definitely be wrong. I look at him as a political opportunist. When he first ran for governor, he lost because he wasn't racist enough, and so he turned up the racist rhetoric, and that won him an election. Well, I think he runs for governor, I think it's 1980. Again, don't trust me. But he runs for governor a third time in like 1980, I think. And by 1980, it's not as popular to be super overtly racist. And so George Wallace says, hey, I was wrong about all that stuff, because it wouldn't get him elected no more. And so he turns all that down. So I think, I don't know how he felt in his heart, but I think he was seeking political power and would do whatever the heck it took to get it. An example is his wife. He allowed her to die of cancer so that he would be able to hold on to power. So I think, saying, turning up the racism, turning down the racism, I think that was fine for, George Wallace in his head to get himself elected. So anyway, but here's the thing. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. Here's the thing to underline in your notes that is likely going to be on the final. Look at the map there. We have a third-party candidate that actually wins states in the Electoral College. That doesn't happen. Like, third-party candidates are usually wonderful because they bring something to the political discourse. Great example is Gary Johnson ran in 2008. 2008. Gary Johnson ran for president in 2008, and he ran on the Libertarian Party ticket, and he was about marijuana. He was about marijuana legalization, and that was the central platform of his party. And probably to a degree anyway, as a result of him being super positive about marijuana, we've seen political changes. Sorry, I keep hitting the microphone. We've seen political changes in regard to marijuana policy in the United States over the last 20 years now. So third parties are great for bringing something to the political debate that neither party would have maybe brought. But George Wallace in this case is great for showing that transition, that the Democratic Party's changing, but it's leaving some folks behind. And the American Independent Party taking 5 states in 1968 is kind of wow. And it shows that the Democratic Party is changing. They're leaving Southern Democrats behind. The Republican Party will pick them up later. But for right now, they're kind of, those folks are kind of off. So that's this side of the ticket, Democrats and Independents. Let's see if we can get, there we go. The Republican Party in 68 is going to nominate Richard Milhouse Nixon. If you watch The Simpsons, Milhouse from The Simpsons, he gets his name from Richard Nixon, Richard Nixon's middle name. Now, another thing to note down, Nixon is a political moderate. Even at the time, even in 1968, he is a political moderate. He is going to be right there in the middle, and he's going to do things, politically intelligent things, to cater to both the left and as well as the right. And in a lot of ways, Nixon's really intelligent. In other ways, he's very, very fragile, and it almost he does have some psychological issues. I'm not diagnosing anybody, but Nixon's got some fragility that he's struggling with. So Republicans are going to nominate Nixon. A great example of Nixon being a political moderate and playing to both sides are his policies on race. On the one hand, he needs to appeal to I keep hitting the mic. He needs to appeal to social conservatives. So he's going to slow down. He promises to slow down desegregation issues. We are still working on integrating the schools and moving forward on that. And so we're still working on that. Well, he's like, we're going to slow this stuff down. We're going to be very careful and deliberate, which are code words for we're going to slow this down and not be as aggressive about it. And that makes happy a lot of social conservatives that were against integration. But at the same time, not probably the same day, but in the same administration, Nixon will sign an executive order establishing affirmative action. And if you're not familiar with affirmative action, it is an order that says that if you have a company or an organization of a certain size, you have to have a certain percentage of women and racial minorities that work at your organization, company, whatever the heck you got. And it's an attempt to also sort of integrate the workplace because we were just hiring a bunch of white dudes. And, we need to have some different faces around. And that would be cool. So Nixon establishes affirmative action. So he's playing both sides here. It's kind of interesting, politically kind of to look at this. Now, on this, you don't have to write down the thing on OSHA. You don't have to write down the Endangered Species Act. Do get down the Great Society issues and do get down the stuff on Elvis, because that's just weird. But some other stuff with Nixon, and keep in mind, Nixon's a Republican. But these are not the Republicans of today. These are not the Republicans of the 1980s. Reagan will roll back a lot of this stuff and argue against it. But Nixon is going to continue policies from the Democratic president Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson, during his administration, rolled out this Great Society plan. I think it's kind of, the phrase that I'm about to say is kind of goofy. I think the idea behind it is cool. But Johnson rolls out this idea that we're going to have a war on poverty. He's wanting to alleviate poverty, to hopefully end poverty. I think that's, pie in the sky. It would be wonderful, but I don't think you'll ever accomplish that, unfortunately. But Johnson wants to do more social programs, social safety net programs, that kind of stuff. And he calls this the Great Society. We are a wealthy nation. We have the ability to take care of the poor people. And so Johnson has this Great Society program. Nixon thinks that's a fantastic idea. And he wants to expand social safety nets. Today, whatever you think about it, but today the Republican Party kind of, hey, we need to cut back on social safety nets. We need to urge people to go to work and stuff like that. But Nixon's expanding on these things. So definitely political moderate, not really what you would think of the Republican Party today, because the Republican Party is going to move right. Also, we're going to bring more regulations to businesses. We're going to increase the power of OSHA. You don't have to get this down. OSHA's Occupational Safety and Health Administration. If you work in usually an industrial setting, OSHA inspectors might come in and, hey, that piece of machinery is dangerous the way you've got it set up. It's going to rip Jimmy's arms off. Let's fix that. They will kind of do inspections of the workplace to try to limit injuries and stuff like that. It's government regulation though. And so, but Nixon increases the power of OSHA. Nixon's going to sign off on and be supportive of the Endangered Species Act. We are going to protect certain segments of the environment to, help out endangered species. And a really big success story. There's lots of them, but a very big success story out of the Endangered Species Act with Nixon is the bald eagle. The bald eagle were in really, really, really super low numbers during this time period. They were getting into stuff that was poisoning them. People, I don't remember if people were actually shooting them. I think that was still against the law. But they were definitely, on the decline. And I think they were endangered at one point. But a lot of regulations and stuff have gone out to protect the bald eagle, as well as a lot of other animals. But the bald eagle's actually in recovery now, and that's really kind of cool. The other thing, and this is more of a bar trivia, some weirdness kind of thing, and it does go for connections. It really hits a lot about knowing people. During the Nixon administration, Elvis Presley wanted to be an actual law enforcement agent. He is not asking for, give me a fake badge and I will carry it around and think it's kind of spiffy. Elvis wanted to be a legit law enforcement agent. He wanted to, as far as I know, he did not arrest anybody, but he wanted to have arrest powers. And he wanted to be able to legally carry a firearm. Around this time, the United States was not sort of on this thing of concealed carry permits and stuff like that. You could get in some serious trouble if you were illegally carrying. And Elvis wanted to be able to carry. But he wanted to be an actual agent, law enforcement agent. And so his people got in touch with the Nixon White House, and President Richard Nixon named Elvis Presley as a actual, not ceremonial, not honorific. Elvis Presley was an actual DEA agent with arrest powers and the ability to concealed carry at a time when most Americans could not. But he's Elvis, and he has clout and stuff, so he's able to kind of get this, which is very, very wild. Ironically, and you may or may not know this, but ironically, Elvis would later die of a drug overdose because he unfortunately was addicted to a lot of different drugs towards the end of his life. But that's Nixon is going to win the presidency, and his first 4 years are fairly successful. He is fairly popular, and it looks like, we can't know for certain without going through what he's going to do, but it looks like he will win re-election. He's fairly popular. He's got fairly decent approval ratings. When he runs in 1972, probably going to win re-election. And that's cool. But like I said earlier, Nixon has an incredibly, incredibly fragile personality. He is very, very paranoid that people are out to get him. He is really, really, really super fragile about people not supporting Richard Nixon. When he originally lost the presidency in 1962, you have to get this down. But in 1962, he originally ran against John F. Kennedy. And after he lost the election, he gave press conferences and said, you guys aren't going to have poor Richard Nixon to kick around anymore. And he felt that dejected, which I would imagine losing the president hits pretty hard, losing the presidency. But he did not plan to run for anything else. He was that just beat down. The American people don't like me. He's that fragile. And so in 1972, when he runs for re-election, in his soul, he needs this. He absolutely, tragically needs this. This is a confirmation of him completely. And so he needs to. He doesn't need to just barely win. He looked like he probably would have won. He needs to win in a landslide because he is just so, such a fragile person, And to kind of give you an idea about how just kind of off, lack of a better word, off Richard Nixon is that he has an enemies list. He legit, somewhere over there, there you go, has a notebook. And it has a list of people that have wronged him or people that have offended him in some way. And it's just various people that have gotten on Richard Nixon's bad side that he feels like we have got to go after these people. Y'all, one of the people on Richard Nixon's enemies list is the guy that repairs the elevator at the White House. Like, that's a person on his enemies list. The elevator repairman at the White House. Richard Nixon feels like the elevator repairman doesn't like him and is probably not repairing the elevator correctly and causing Richard Nixon, I guess, to take the stairs more often than not. And so, like, that dude's on the enemies list of Richard Nixon. So super, super just fragile dude. Well, that fragility is unfortunately for Nixon going to get him in a lot of trouble because he needs to win in a landslide, and so he's going to be willing to do stuff that's not on the up and up that is going to get him into trouble. And a couple of things to scribbly down. You don't really need to get down George McGovern, like he's there, but Edmund Muskie really kind of, we mention him to talk about quite a bit, or well, I don't know, a decent amount. Anyway, whatever. Shut up, John. But one of the things that the Nixon re-election campaign is going to do is they're going to create an organization called CREEP. And they named themselves. This is not the press attacking Nixon. Let's give them a stupid name. They named themselves CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President. Scribbly down kind of a thing. CREEP is going to engage in a whole lot of underhanded stuff. And they are also going to, like a lot of dirty tricks kind of stuff. They're also going to engage in some actually illegal stuff. Like some of the stuff it's politics. Politics is a dirty sport. And some of it looks a little bit more underhanded than normal, but some of the stuff they do is actually illegal, even at the time. And so one of the things that CREEP is going to do is they're really the front runner, like it says on time there, the front runner for 1972 is Edmund Muskie. CREEP is going to draft a letter, and you don't have to get the details because it is kind of a weird thing to think about today. This doesn't really quite get it. But CREEP wrote a letter that was allegedly from Edmund Muskie. This was not from him, but they wrote this letter and they released it to the press that, hey, we've uncovered this letter from Edmund Muskie. And this is the part you don't have to get down, and I personally find it weird, but it's called the Canuck letter, and it insults French Canadians. And the reason it plays in American politics up in the extreme northern states, Michigan and maybe Maine, there are a lot of, people of French Canadian ancestry. And so this Canuck letter insulted those people. Well, those people are going to be offended. Their friends are going to be offended because you've offended my friends. And so this is supposed to kind of damage Edmund Muskie's reputation in the American Northeast. And so that's a thing. So they write this fake letter and, trying to tarnish his reputation. And it gets worse. And it's not, some of it's not really Creep's doing, but it's interesting how stuff plays out in politics. But, in some of the other stuff, and she may have been, I don't know, I've not researched her, but Creep also releases some information that would say that Edmund Muskie's wife is a racist and an alcoholic. I don't know if she was either, but Creep is putting out the word that she's a racist and an alcoholic. So Edmund Muskie, it's in the winter time. He gives a press conference outside, refuting this letter and defending his wife. And during the press conference, it starts snowing. And there's these big, those big giant snowflakes that sometimes we get down here in Alabama, those big, just kind of beefy things. And he's giving this press conference outside, and he's emotional. He's upset because these people have attacked his wife, and they've also falsely said that he doesn't like French Canadians. So he's emotional, and you can see it in his face and in his voice and speech and stuff like that. Well, these big snowflakes start landing on his face. And he's hot because he's a human being, so he's 98.6. And so these snowflakes start melting on his face. And as they start melting, he's got water that's coming down his face. And so he looks like he's crying. And that is fantastic for the Nixon campaign. They are going to look at this guy. He's writing letters about French Canadians. His wife is an alcoholic and she's a racist. And here, look at this dude. He's out here in the public and he can't control his emotions. He's sobbing and crying. And what kind of a masculine man is that to be out there doing such things? And it's fine to cry, but he wasn't crying. But he looks like he was. And so Creep just nails him on that. And Edmund Muskie drops out of the race. And none of that stuff was true, but his reputation, his political standing's dead. And so he drops out of the race. And pretty quickly after he drops out, George McGovern is going to step in as the new Democratic candidate. McGovern, you don't have to get anything down on McGovern, but McGovern's going to be attacked as, this socialist and this wild communist, and that he's soft on communism. He's fine with, pulling out of the Vietnam War, stuff like that. And so they really kind of go after George McGovern in the press. It's politics, it's fair, but they go after him and he just gets trashed. I hope that did not blink out on you guys, but we'll see. So that's mostly okay. Creep does commit some campaign finance fraud, and that's not okay, but that doesn't get the headlines, and it's not going to be super, super problematic. Now, bigger thing though, the thing that gets Nixon in trouble is that also in 1972, the Creep Committee to Re-elect the President is headed up by George Gordon Liddy. We talked about George Gordon Liddy back in the 1920s with his book there, When I Was a Kid, This Was a Free Country. Well, for him. But George Gordon Liddy is going to head up Creep, and Creep decides that inside strategy information would be very good. And so they decide to break in to the Democratic National Committee headquarters. And at the time, the Democratic National Committee headquarters is in that very cool horseshoe-shaped building in Washington, D.C., the Watergate Hotel. There's hotel rooms in there, but there's also office space and conference rooms and stuff like that. Well, the DNC has their headquarters in there, and so they are doing strategies, they're doing campaign strategies, attack ideas, and things like that. And whenever you run a political campaign, you need to do, one, opposition research, trying to find the faults and the hidden skeletons in the other guy's closet, other person's closet. You also need to investigate yourself. Hey, if I've got skeletons in my closet, how easy are they to find? And so you have DNC operatives that are going to investigate your own people, your own candidates, to like, hey, how easy is this to find? And if it is easy to find, we got to get ahead of it and stuff like that. So lots of cool stuff. So the Liddy group is going to break into the Democratic National Committee headquarters stuff. And they're going to break in. And one of the things that they do is they are going to tap the phones. They're going to put bugs on all of the phones. Because, hey, if we can listen to their internal phone calls, strategies, places that they're going to campaign in, we can get ahead of that. And so in 1972, they put several bugs on the phones, taps on the phones of the DNC headquarters there. Well, you don't have to get this down, but this is 1972, and so the technology is not super good, and so those bugs work for a while, but then they stop working. And so a little bit later, I think within a couple of months, Liddy organizes a second break-in of the Watergate Hotel, the DNC there in the Watergate Hotel. And one of the things they do is, these are hotel, I'm pointing at my door, these are hotel doors, right? And so you've got a key, and you guys have been to hotels. If you approach the hotel door from outside, the door's locked, right? And you open the door, but then you go in, and if you want to leave the hotel room, the interior door handle is always unlocked. And so the group that Liddy is in, somebody has to pick the lock and open the door. Well, that takes, if you're fast, you can do it in 30 seconds maybe. I've never tried this. I've got a friend that's into it. He says, 30 seconds is his average time, but he's not practicing all the time. Probably these guys weren't either. But, sorry. But somebody's got to pick the lock. Well, they're going to be coming in and out. And they don't want to arouse suspicion by having to pick this lock over and over, because people are going to be passing by and stuff like that. And so they don't want to do that. So one of the burglars takes some tape, write this down, takes some tape. And they're going to use duct tape, but I've only got Scotch tape, so play with. But they're going to take some tape, and the door catch, where the catch goes into the frame of the door, and that's what the clasp holds it closed and open. They're going to take some tape, and they're going to put it over the clasp and tape it back, so the hatch isn't sticking out of the door anymore, so that they can go in and out and not have to repick the lock. Well, cool. The security guard for the Watergate Hotel comes by, and he sees the tape on the lock. And he thinks, hey, the custodial team probably came by, and they probably don't want to find the key and unlock the door. That's a hassle. So probably they're going to come by, and they just use this tape trick so that they don't have to constantly unlock the door and stuff like that. And so he figures that they did that. They forgot to take the tape off, and it's not really a thing. So he pulls the tape off and allows the door to close, and then he continues on his rounds, not thinking anything's, an issue. Meanwhile, the burglars are inside the suite there in the DNC headquarters. Okay. So he makes his rounds. Well, one of the burglars has to go out and get something because, like I said, they're coming in and out. And one of the burglars goes out to do something, and he sees that the tape is gone. And so he puts another piece of tape on the door. And then the security guard comes back, and there's a second piece of tape on the door. And so that time he calls the police. And the police go into the DNC headquarters and they arrest, I think there were 4 to 5 guys inside. And so they arrest those guys that are weirdly, if you're going to break into somewhere, usually you're stealing valuables, but what the heck are these guys doing? And so there's an investigation into this break-in. What were these guys doing there? What's going on? And internally, the FBI is going to investigate this. They do start to find some links to the White House. So the FBI is going to investigate this, and they're going to find some links to the White House. We're not sure exactly, super sure, but there are some connections there. Well, the president is over the FBI, and so the president starts to try to shut this down. And we know this. The president is going to get involved, and this is obstruction of justice. This is an illegal thing to do, but the president's going to get involved. He is going to try to shut this down. All right. So, the Nixon administration is trying to cover this up. And Nixon himself, we'll talk about evidence later, but Nixon himself is involved at this point. There's a little bit of on the planning stage of the break-in, but we definitely, we have recorded evidence at this point that Nixon is involved and is actively trying to cover up this crime. So that's, again, obstruction of justice. You can't do that. So, whoops, sorry, skipped a slide. There we go. So the Nixon administration is involved. Somebody, we'll talk about him in a second, somebody contacts a couple of reporters. And you don't need to remember what newspaper these two guys, picture of Woodward and Bernstein up there at the top. You don't need to remember that they work for the Washington Post. You do need to remember Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, that are reporters that do investigate the Nixon ties to the Watergate Hotel. So somebody calls Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, and they tell them that, hey, this is a thing. There was a break-in at the Watergate Hotel, and it is connected to the Nixon administration. And they start feeding them information that, hey, you guys need to look in this direction, and this direction, and this direction, and go and talk to this person. And they do start making these connections. So Woodward and Bernstein are now reporters that are investigating the Nixon White House, because the Nixon White House is leaning on the FBI to shut this investigation down. So we have the press that is going to investigate this. Scribbly down kind of a thing. At the time, in 1973, I think this starts coming out, in 1973. 1973, Woodward and Bernstein do not reveal their source in the newspaper or in other interviews. They only use the code name for their source, Deep Throat. Deep Throat is a pornographic movie at the time, and so that's what they and the source elect to call the source. It's kind of, I don't know, just, hey, here's a porn movie, and it's kind of funny to name the source that. But definitely is named after a porn movie. And they, Woodward and Bernstein, promise their source that they will not reveal who this person is until that person passes away. They tell them, if you want to come clean and go public, we will back you up and say, yes, this is the source, but they tell the source, hey, we're not going to reveal who you are until either you want to or you pass away. So for a very, very long time, the American public, history nerds, everybody has zero idea who told them stuff, was feeding them information. Super cool, scribbly down. In 2005, this was huge. I don't know, to me anyway, but I'm a history nerd. But in 2005, a gentleman named Mark Felt, and that's him in the red blazer there. That's him back in the 1970s, just above with the glasses and the suit and tie. Mark Felt was, in the 1970s, the deputy director for the FBI. So Nixon, and at the time, you don't have to get this down, but at the time, the person that was leading the FBI, the director of the FBI for the Nixon administration, was just kind of a figurehead. I think Nixon appointed him. I could be wrong, but that person doesn't really run the show. And Mark Felt was basically running the FBI. And the Nixon administration is leaning on the FBI to cover up or at least stop investigating the Watergate break-in. So Nixon administration is committing obstruction of justice to try to squish this investigation. And so Mark Felt, as the assistant deputy director of the FBI, is going to contact Woodward and Bernstein. But here's the cool thing. In 2005, I think I said that a while ago, but in 2005, Mark Felt's family, he's about 92 years old. I think 92? Yeah. He's about 92 years old. And his family knows that he was the source. He's told them. But he's like, hey, don't tell nobody. But his kids, who are probably, he's 92, so his kids are probably, 60 to 70. They know that he's the source because he's told them. And around 2005, they go to him, and they're not looking for money for themselves. They could have been, I don't know. But they go to Mark Felt and they tell him, look, you're 92. If you release this information, nobody can do anything to you. You're, not to be mean, but you're very, very much at the end of life. And so nobody really can push back. Nobody can do anything to harm your career or anything like that. As long as you get ice cream, you're happy. But they do tell him, look, if you release this, though, you can probably get a book deal or something like that. And you guys know this. You can pay for the college education of every single one of your grandchildren. College is expensive, right? You guys know this. So they tell him, you can pay for all of your grandchildren's education. And that sounds cool. And so Mark Felt publicly comes forward and says, hey, I am Deep Throat. And Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, I usually reverse their first names for some reason. They back him up, and yes, this is absolutely the person. He does that like 2005, I think. And cool thing, and you don't have to get this down, but this is going to sound weird. We don't have very many in my class. We don't have very many what I would call good deaths. Usually people get killed in horrific ways or are executed or something like that. We don't have too many like, that is a solid way to go out, right? And so Mark Felt released this information, and he signs a deal, and he gets, I think he got $1 million. And in 2005, that's a lot. It's a lot today. But it does pay for all of his grandkids' college and stuff like that. And again, he passed away in 2005. So I'm guessing he does that at the first of the year and towards the end of the year. But he woke up one morning, and he was living with one of his daughters, he went downstairs and had breakfast with the family, and he had what I hope was a really good, cool breakfast. And at the end of breakfast, he says, "You know what? I'm kind of tired." And he told them he wanted to go back upstairs and take a nap. And so after a really good breakfast, Mark Fell went back upstairs. Sorry, I don't know why I get choked up about some people dying. But anyway, he had a good breakfast, went back upstairs, and fell asleep and passed away. And, at 92 years old, that's like a solid kind of send-off. I kind of like that. So, again, we don't have too many good deaths. That's a weird thing in my class. And so I like to kind of talk about Mr. Feltz. That's kind of a neat send-off. Anyway, back to political stuff. This is going to be released in the press. The Washington Post, this is front page news. The Nixon White House is committing crimes. They've committed a burglary. Now they're trying to obstruct the investigation by a federal agency. Holy cow, the crimes are stacking on. And so Nixon is going to attack the press. The media is coming after Nixon. They're revealing stuff, and so he is going to attack the press. This is all a bunch of liberal lies, and all of this stuff is made up. None of this stuff actually happens, and he's going to deny everything and really attack the press. There are suspicions of who the heck leaked information, and one of the things is, you don't have to get him down, but one of the suspected leakers is a guy named Daniel Ellsberg. You maybe or maybe not have heard that name before, but he released a series of documents a little bit earlier. We skipped Vietnam, but he released a series of documents called the Pentagon Papers. And the Pentagon Papers were classified material. You can't do that. But they were classified material that objectively charted how the war was actually going. And the war was not going good. The American government was saying that, the Vietnam War is almost done. We're almost ready to defeat the North Vietnamese. And in reality, that was not the situation. And so Ellsberg releases this information that the reality of the war is actually really, really bad, and we're not close to winning in the slightest. And so this was the Pentagon Papers. Well, comes out during Nixon's administration, and Nixon feels like that's a personal attack. And so Nixon feels like the Nixon administration and people within, not just him, are thinking that Daniel Ellsberg leaked this stuff. And G. Gordon Liddy, the guy from the previous slide and organizer of the Watergate break-in, actually came up with a couple of ideas for dealing with Ellsberg. One of the things that they wanted to do, that they didn't do, but scary stuff, they wanted to coat Ellsberg's steering wheel in his car with LSD. And so hopefully Daniel Ellsberg would be driving in downtown Washington, D.C., and he would absorb the LSD through his hands, and then he would start hallucinating, and maybe he sees a pink elephant sauntering down Pennsylvania Avenue, and Ellsberg, careens off the road to avoid it and running over several pedestrians and winding up inside, with his car inside an office building. And then we can attack him as this kind of crazy drug user sort of person. They actually proposed coating his steering wheel. Liddy also proposed sneaking cyanide inside, like breaking into Daniel Ellsberg's house and then finding his aspirin bottle and putting some cyanide capsules in with his aspirin. And Liddy called this aspirin roulette because we don't know which one of the aspirins that Ellsberg's going to take. And so Liddy actually proposed murdering this guy. The other thing is really, really bad, but this is, I don't know which is worse. But, Liddy's actually talking about killing people. So, this investigation continues, And the United States government, the Department of Justice appoints a special prosecutor. You do not have to remember this guy's name, but it is Archibald Cox. And the Department of Justice appoints Archibald Cox as special prosecutor. Do remember we have a special prosecutor to investigate the Nixon administration, to see if the Nixon administration has committed crimes. Well, Nixon orders, and this is another example of obstruction of justice. Nixon orders that Archibald Cox be fired. Nixon's the head of the United States government. He has the authority kind of to do these things. So Nixon orders the person that's investigating him, Archibald Cox, to be fired. Well, you don't have to get down the number, but the head of the Department of Justice absolutely refuses. I can't do that. Probably illegal. Probably falls within obstruction of justice. And no. And so Nixon fires him. I don't know if he goes through a second person. I think maybe, but I'm not sure. But definitely later, Nixon is going to appoint Robert Bork. Get his name down. Nixon is going to appoint Robert Bork as the acting head of the Department of Justice. And Robert Bork is ordered by the Nixon administration to fire Archibald Cox. And Robert Bork fires Archibald Cox. So first head of the Department of Justice refuses. Nixon fires that guy. Nixon appoints Archibald Cox as acting head of the Department of Justice. You don't have to get this down, but you have to get congressional approval to, I forgot what the word is, but they have to finalize. The president confirm. President nominates people, and the Congress, usually the Senate, confirms people. So he's acting until Congress confirms him, but that's neither here nor there. But Robert Bork fires Archibald Cox. And they do this, scribble down Robert Bork and scribble down Saturday Night Massacre. They do this on a Saturday night. And the press is going to call this the Saturday Night Massacre because basically the Nixon administration fired all of the people that were investigating the Nixon administration. But the reason that they did it on a Saturday night is nobody's at work on a Saturday night. You might be, if you're working overtime on Friday, you might try to work over and catch things up for the weekend. And so that's a possibility. And so they don't want to fire Archibald Cox on Friday night because these guys might be working late. And so they fired him on a Saturday night because no one's at the office. And immediately after firing, the Nixon administration Department of Justice sends people into the offices of Archibald Cox and takes all the files. So all of the evidence, they thought, all the evidence they thought that was in the offices, the Department of Justice is going to clear out. You don't have to get this down. Fortunately, Archibald Cox and a couple of other people from that office, Cox was driving downtown in Washington, D.C. that night and was listening to the radio. And a news story broke into the radio show telling Archibald Cox over the radio that he had been fired. And so very, very quickly, Cox runs to the office to grab their most important files of evidence and then skedaddles. And so later when the Department of Justice shows up, they do get a bunch of evidence, but they don't get the most important stuff because Archibald Cox happened to be listening to the radio and took a detour on a Saturday night. But this is called the Saturday Night Massacre. Now, something else you need to get. This is 1972. It's a little bit later than I thought. In 1987, You don't have to get the dates down. Remember, we're concerned about Hero and Oda for our dates. But in 1987, Ronald Reagan was president from 82 to 88, or 80 to 88, sorry. I stole a couple of years. He was president from 82 to 80, or 80 to 88. Anyway, Ronald Reagan nominated Robert Bork to the United States Supreme Court. Robert Bork is a loyal Republican, and so Reagan nominated Robert Bork to the United States Supreme Court. Well, presidents nominate people, Congress confirms. And so Congress had hearings, and they do this, every Supreme Court justice. Congress had hearings questioning Robert Bork. And Robert Bork fired the old special prosecutor. That's an obstruction of justice. And so in the United States Senate, they absolutely rail on Robert Bork. They just grill him mercilessly. Were you involved in the Nixon administration? Did you fire a special prosecutor? Isn't that obstruction of justice, you knucklehead? And so Robert Bork is not confirmed by the United States Congress to be on the United States Supreme Court. And scribbly down, this was so hardcore that Robert Bork's name becomes a verb. If you are absolutely grilled by the United States, it's an adjective, sorry. No? Yeah, it's an adjective. If you are, I don't know if that's right or not. Who knows? English people are down the hall. If you're absolutely grilled by the United States Congress in one of these confirmation hearings today, it's called getting borked, because that's what happened with him. And so anybody that happens to, they call it getting borked. And so that's kind of like you have to do something really, really bad for your name to become a different word. So anyway, now this is all, getting released in the press. The Nixon administration has now, once again, they've already broken into the Watergate Hotel, so that's a crime. They have obstructed justice by leaning on the FBI. They've obstructed justice by firing Archibald Cox, trying to get ahead of this. On top of that, you don't have to get this down, but the Nixon administration had, other presidents have had this, but the Nixon administration had a recording device in the Oval Office that would automatically kick off and start recording anytime it heard voices, kind of like Alexa. And so the Nixon administration, the Nixon White House, had recordings of discussions in the Oval Office, and the United States Congress subpoenaed these. And that's a court order to release these tapes. And this goes before the United States Supreme Court, and the Nixon administration is refusing to turn over these tapes. Finally, they're ordered to do so by the United States Supreme Court. And so they turn over the tapes, but there's blank spots in the tapes where somebody recorded over the most sensitive stuff. And so there's blank spots in the tapes. So that's, contempt of Congress. And so within Congress, within the House of Representatives, small group of people, the House Judicial Committee is going to draft impeachment charges against Richard Nixon. You don't have to get these down, but there are 3 charges. One's obstruction of justice, one's contempt of Congress, and I forgot what the other one is. Hatred of the elevator guy. But there are 3 charges that they go after him with. And the United States House of Representatives then gets ready to bring impeachment charges. Now, the way this works, and you guys have seen this within your lifetimes, the House of Representatives impeaches a president. Okay? And what that means is they just bring charges, and then the United States Senate does the trial and either convicts or acquits. No presidents have been convicted of impeachment charges. Several presidents have been impeached. Scribbly down, underline with stars and glitter and giant circles of highlighters. Nixon is going to resign the presidency before he's impeached. So the House Judiciary Committee drafts these charges. They're about to go before the United States House of Representatives, but they don't get there. And Nixon is going to resign. And so Nixon is not impeached because he left before that could happen. Presidents that have been impeached, Andrew Johnson has been impeached, Bill Clinton has been impeached, Donald Trump has been impeached. No one has been convicted. Impeachment is a political process, and so usually your party is going to vote to acquit, the other party is going to vote to convict, and then that's what happens. So whether or not there's clear evidence, it doesn't quite matter. So Nixon is going to resign. Nixon's going to resign the presidency. A number of people, I have to get this down, but a number of people, I think about 20 within the administration, actually do some jail time. G. Gordon Liddy refuses to cooperate and refuses to testify, and so he does some jail time. He does some jail time on contempt of court, but he also was involved in the break-in and was involved in the cover-up, and so he does some time for that. I think maybe about, I don't think that's right, but I think maybe about 10 years. I'm not really sure, but he does a dime at least. So several people went to jail. Nixon doesn't pardon anybody before he takes off. Scribbly down thing, and we're almost about done with the Nixon administration. Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford is Nixon's vice president. He had a vice president before, a very cool dude with a really interesting name, Spiro Agnew. Spiro Agnew, while he was vice president, got involved in some kind of corruption charges or something not related to Watergate. And Spiro Agnew resigns the vice presidency, and Nixon doesn't have a vice president for the rest of his first term, and for the second re-election, he is going to go with Gerald Ford. So Nixon resigns, Gerald Ford is sworn in as president, and scribbly down big thing, Gerald Ford pardons Nixon for any crimes that were related to Watergate. He does kind of narrowly sort of define that. So if Nixon killed somebody and we didn't know about it, he could have been charged with that. But any crimes related to Watergate, Gerald Ford is going to pardon Richard Nixon for. And a couple of things before we cut this off. Two things. This crisis of confidence. The American public, and we've seen this before, but I think not to this degree, but the American public prior to Nixon really had a lot of faith in their institutions. That, hey, I might not agree with the president, but I think and I feel like the president is acting with the best interests of the country at heart. And I might not agree with this. I might think that these are stupid missteps, but I think the president at the time feels like that this is best for the country, and that's the reason why they're choosing to act in this manner. After this, we don't have that. And it recovers a little bit, but there's a dip. This shakes a lot of the confidence in the United States for our public institutions, that the politicians, like, look at Nixon. Nixon was this very fragile person that was fighting for just retaining power and was doing all kinds of corrupt and very underhanded and illegal stuff to try to hang on to power. And that's not what we want to see in the president. So we have this big crisis of confidence. This shakes the faith of a lot of people in our institutions. And again, it'll recover, but man, we're in a trough for a while. Second thing to get down. A lot of people are very shaken by Gerald Ford's decision to pardon Richard Nixon. A lot of people feel like, hey, Nixon committed these crimes. Nixon was involved in this stuff. We have evidence of that. Nixon should have been put on trial and should have faced consequences for his actions. And we as a country, as a society, were denied that. And so a lot of people, like the sign says on there, Gerald Ford is Richard Nixon's getaway car. And so a lot of people distrust, don't like, think is a giant knucklehead, Gerald Ford. And big underlining thing, Gerald Ford will lose his bid for re-election. He's going to serve out the rest of Nixon's term, and he will run for re-election in 76 against Jimmy Carter. And Gerald Ford will lose that election because he is really, really identified definitely with Richard Nixon, and his pardoning of Nixon kind of, sort of robbed us, the American people, of a sense of justice, of a sense of right and wrong. And so Gerald Ford's going to lose this election. And a lot of, I don't really feel like I'm a political historian. I'm more of a social kind of historian. But a lot of political historians and folks like that really argue that decision, pardoning Richard Nixon, cost Gerald Ford the election in 1976. And so Gerald Ford's going to lose that. So right there, we are good. I'm going to you've already watched this at this point, but I'm going to upload this to the class real quick. And there you go. So if you do have any questions, please let me know. I will be happy to answer stuff through email or through class when we get back in class. So talk to you later.